Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Ended Up in Vegas podcast. I'm Nikki.
I'm Megan.
Do you have a fully executed estate plan? We're talking with Shane Jasmine Young from the Young Law Group this week. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Tell us how you ended up in Vegas.
I moved here when I was 9. So I grew up in Vegas, but we got here because my dad's job. And he was in the airline business. He was working for a local Grand Canyon tour company and was the CFO, COO, and actually ended up starting his own business here, another small airline. So we weren't planning to stay here, I don't think, because our family was in Texas and New York, but this was a job opportunity after he was laid off that got us here, and then we never left.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Tell us how you got into working as an attorney.
Yeah, so I was first interested in the law because when my dad started his business, he hired a lawyer to make sure that everything was taken care of with respect to his new business, his airline, hired other people, got airplanes, got financing, had this business running. But unfortunately, that attorney took advantage of him and took control through the help of some other third parties as well. And they ran the company into bankruptcy and we lost everything. So I was young when this happened. I was, 12, 13 in middle school, but my dad shared a lot about that experience. And, he was always just like, you can't trust, you have to be careful who you trust and you've got to have the information. And so education was really important. And that was the value that was instilled in me very early on. So the way that translated for me was I had to get straight A's. I was one of those kids. I had to get straight A's. I graduated as a valedictorian from Green Valley High School. And then I went to Pepperdine for undergrad. And my last semester of Pepperdine is when I found out that I was pregnant with twins. So I'm actually married to my high school sweetheart. So we've been together since 1995. And that was not part of our plan because I was supposed to go right into law school, at Pepperdine in the fall of 2000. But that's when our daughters were born. So we came back here to Las Vegas. And I thankfully was able to go to law school here at Boyd. And ever since then, it's just been a great opportunity being back in Vegas and being able to practice law here and serve the community and be with my family. It really is a dream.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I grew up going to Zuma Beach and always driving by Pepperdine, and I was like, I would like to go there. Yeah. It's like the best location of a school anywhere.
Oh my gosh. It has the best views. And you would think that I'd be at the beach all the time, but no. I didn't go. Yeah.
No.
A few times. But yeah, some people did, but it was really nice. Zuma's nice.
Yeah.
When I first heard Shane's story, I was like, wait a minute. This is a woman who's not only like unbelievably beautiful, but she's so accomplished and she did all of these really hard things while, raising a family. So you have 5 girls.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So I mentioned my twins. They were born in August of 2000. So they're actually 22 years old now. I can't believe that. About to be 23 in August. They are graduating from undergrad. So they played basketball. They played basketball in college at Whitman College, graduating this month with a double major in econ and rhetoric. They are going to law school in the fall. So they had different offers, full rides to multiple schools, and they decided to come back home to Vegas. So really excited. They'll be starting law school at Boyd. And then my younger 3 are still at home with us. And Kaylin is 15, Cameron is 13, and Samara is about to be 12. So all 5 of them play basketball. So we're busy, taking them, back and forth to practice and games. And of course, they all play on different teams. So it's busy.
Yeah.
It's busy.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I heard your story and I heard about your family and I learned about your business, immediate respect for you and what you do. So tell us part of what you do to educate people about protecting their families and their assets.
Yeah. So I focus my law practice on estate planning. And the reason why I chose that area was because I started off actually in the big law firms, the big fancy firms. I was representing big, corporations, businesses, but I wasn't fulfilled. I was making a lot of money, which was great. I had that financial security that I didn't really have growing up because of my dad's story, but I wasn't fulfilled, and I really wanted to be able to help people. So I did a lot of pro bono work in the 10 years or so that I was in the big law firm, and then I went in-house and I was a general counsel for a financial services company. So all of it kind of tied together, because as a general counsel, we served as a custodian for a lot of, IRA accounts and things like that. When someone would die, the families would call me and they would be seeking help. How do I navigate this process? My family, my family member didn't have a will, they didn't have a trust, and now I've got all these questions, and now it's a mess, and now we've got to go to court, or like, what do we do? And of course I couldn't advise them on what to do. I would be able to point them to resources, thankfully, but when I opened my firm in 2017, I wanted to be able to really focus on serving the community, because estate planning touches everybody, right? At some point, we're all going to die. We've all experienced death. We've experienced, everything in between, and having a proper legal plan in place is so important, no matter what our different dynamics are. And, I tell people all the time, if you're over 18, if you are a legal adult, you need some type of planning in place, and it's going to look different across the board. A typical 18-year-old, young adult, their plan is going to look different than someone, like me, who's in their 40s that has a business or has kids. So that's a common misconception. People think like, oh, well, I have to be older, or I have to have a lot of wealth, or I have to have kids, or I have to be married. And, none of that is true. You have an estate, an estate technically is, you, even if you have no assets, it's your decisions. If you were in an accident, if you couldn't make your own medical decisions, or handle your financial affairs, or take care of your kids, or take care of your pets, in addition to the assets, of course.
So tell us a little bit about the difference between a will and a trust, and the pros and cons to each of them.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the most common questions that we get. And people, most times when you think about estate planning, you think of a will or a trust, and common misconceptions around both of those things. So a will is really a document that is not comprehensive. It really just deals with the disposition of your assets. So it just says who gets what. So when you only have a will, it becomes a public record, because it has to be filed with the probate court, and then it has to go through, your estate has to go through that process, which takes a long time. Even for simple estates, it can take a year and a half, 2 years, more than that. When you've got complicated estates like Tony Shea, his estate has been ongoing now for over 3 years. And the reason his estate is going through that is because he didn't have any estate planning documents in place, no will, no trust. So a will really, it does not keep you out of probate. It actually opts you in to having to go to court. Your family has to go through court. It's very expensive. It's public. It's dangerous, because that's how a lot of predators will prey on people that are receiving an inheritance, because people think that it's private, but it's not. Your personal information, your address, your contact information, the assets that you're going to be receiving, all of that is fair game. So, having that in the public is not in our best interest. So a will really just deals with the disposition of your assets. A trust, on the other hand, is considered a will substitute, in that you can completely bypass the court process. So you can avoid court, you can keep everything private, make sure that the people that you want are, the right people are the ones that are making decisions. A judge is not making those decisions for you. We're keeping it out of the public eye, so things are being handled privately and immediately, so there's no delay. We're able to avoid taxes, all those other expenses that come along with probate. So that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize, is probate is something that is voluntary. You opt into it when you don't have a proper plan, or you only have a will, or sometimes people have trusts, but they're not set up properly. Their assets are not titled in the right way in the name of the trust. So there's so many mistakes that people make, and that's why I focus on education and sharing, these things that are so important. It can seem basic once you understand it, but so many people just don't have that that base knowledge to be able to make empowered decisions.
Yeah. And I've tried to explain it to real estate clients, and obviously I'm not an attorney, so I don't give them advice, but just giving the, basic terms and And people think that I think from conversations that I've had is that people think a trust is an actual like thing, you know, like it's like a safety deposit box or something where it actually goes into a trust where it's like, no, this is kind of like crypto. Like there is an umbrella and it just fully designates those things to go into the hands of the person who you have designated to be that carrier. Is that
right?
How you explain it?
And so a trust is really an agreement, you know, and that's the common misconception that you mentioned. Like people think it's like an actual thing.
Yeah.
It's really a set of documents that address or should address the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how, all of those questions as far as what would happen in any circumstance, any contingency related to your incapacity and your death. So it does more than just says who gets what. We're actually able to avoid taxes, estate taxes. We can protect real estate, you know, when it comes to capital gains, getting a step up in basis so your family is not getting hit with that large tax bill. There's a lot of other benefits to having a trust. And like I said, it's just an agreement, but it's it's much more comprehensive than just having a will. So a trust should be very detailed and address a host of contingencies, but that's what allows us to avoid probate and keep everything private.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Shane's group did my trust. So it also includes a living will so that if something were to happen to me, I have health, guidelines that I have outlined as to what I want to happen in case of XYZ. So go into the terms of, this is really covering so many bases. Like you don't realize how many things can happen at once, or if you were to pass with someone else who you have designated to be the beneficiary of something, like what happens in that event. So it's, when we went into it, it was kind of like, might be a depressing, thing to think about.
Like who wants to talk about death,
Yeah. But talk to us about how, you take all of those things into account when you create a trust for someone.
Yeah. And you really should take a holistic approach to your plan, because there's so many different things that can occur, right? So we were talking about, a will versus a trust, and usually that's to protect the assets, but a trust really does so much more and addresses, if you're incapacitated, what does that look like? What are your wishes? How are the assets going to be passed to your beneficiaries? And that's another thing that's so important, especially if you have young beneficiaries. If you've got children, you don't want your minor children, we're talking about our kids earlier, right? To receive a large inheritance, even if it's just, say a life insurance policy, $100,000, $50,000, $1 million, right? Yeah. You don't want them getting that at age 18 because they're going to make some bad choices probably. Exactly. So you're able to protect them and protect the assets by setting up a trust that outlines, what is to happen at what age, and protecting them and protecting the assets, and also creating generational wealth so that we're not losing wealth that we've accumulated, that we've worked so hard for during our lifetime. So it doesn't, it ends up going to the state or to the government. We want to protect those assets and be able to pass them from one generation to the next. So that's one component of your planning. Right. And then Nikki, you mentioned, healthcare decisions, financial decisions. So we think about estate planning in terms of death, but what if we're in an accident, right? What if we're disabled or hospitalized, incapacitated, and we can't speak or we can't make our own decisions? We need someone to be able to step in, that's legally authorized, that can basically adhere to the wishes that we have. So our directives, we're turning our wishes into directives so that there's something there where there's no conflict, there's no question. Our loved ones don't have to go to a probate judge. It's called a living probate when you don't have proper planning documents, but you haven't passed away and you're incapacitated. So they would have to go to court to resolve any conflicts and to be appointed legally to step in. So common misconception is, my spouse can just make decisions for me, or my parents or whoever, but the law does not just default to, a specific family member. So you're leaving it to a judge if you don't set those things in motion now and you're not clear about what your wishes are. So it's your medical wishes, allowing them to have access to your medical records so that they can make the proper decisions, your end of life decisions. Would you want to be kept on life support? Would you want to be kept on a feeding tube? Do you want your agent to be able to weigh the pros and cons, and make a decision based on what, you've directed them? Also, who can handle your financial affairs, right? Who can go to the bank for you and pay your bills? Who can take care of your kids? And this is a really, really important area where we see plans fail all the time, is when we have minor children, there is not a proper plan in place for those emergency situations. So think about it, if your kids were at home and you didn't make it home, what does that look like? And this was scary for me, realizing this years ago. And I'm an attorney, right? Yeah. So I realized years ago that all 5 of my girls were at home with a babysitter. My husband and I went out on a date. I share this story often. It's my date night story. And we're having a good time. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking about the kids and I'm like, hold on. What would really happen? Like if we didn't make it home, tonight, what would happen? And of course, my husband's like, wow, Shane, way to kill, way to kill the mood, buzzkill. But it was a real question. And I realized that if we didn't have a proper plan in place for an emergency situation for our kids, what would happen is the cops would show up. They'd see that they were there with a babysitter who did not have legal authority to take care of them. They would take my 5 children into custody and into CPS. So CPS would step in, and then a judge would be deciding who would take care of them short term and also long term, as far as who would raise them if something happened and we didn't make it. So that was scary to me because the law defaults to blood relatives. Okay. Blood relatives are the ones that are basically up first to be able to step in and take care of your kids. Well, I have a lot of blood relatives here in Vegas, and there are many that I would not want spending 5 minutes alone, with my kids, let alone, a short-term guardian or long-term potentially. Sure. So that was really scary for me. And that's why we address that as part of the planning that we do for clients, where we do a kids protection plan that addresses, short-term guardianships, long-term guardianships, instructions to caregivers, family members, babysitters, so that they know not to just call the cops if we don't show up, but to call the right people and to instruct them. Medical powers of attorney for our children. So that's nice because, my kids play sports, and a lot of us, have kids that are traveling or we're traveling and going on vacation. So those medical powers of attorney enable the people that are caring for our kids to seek medical attention if something were to happen and our kids needed care.
And if you've ever been to Child Haven, you know that that's not a place you want any child to spend even 5 minutes in before someone comes to pick them up. And something else that I thought of is I've seen a couple of situations where a next of kin person is an 18-year-old child. You think, oh, I've got sisters, I've got brothers, I've got a mother. The law does not default to that. The law defaults to your 18-year-old next of kin, if that's who it is, and that's the person making the decisions.
Right. And scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something I think a lot about because I'm a single parent. So it's something that when we talk about it, it's like, I know I need to do it. I know I need to set up all of the things. How does it work? And I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask this. When you have shared custody. So when you create your own directive, how does that work?
Right. So it's important that you have a plan for yourself, right? Because you want to make sure if anything were to happen that the right people can step in. Now, when it comes to the kids protection plan and you're sharing custody, you're co-parenting, that's important also because, if you have your kids and it might not be 100% of the time, but if the kids are in your care and something happens to you, you want, the other parent to be able to be called, first. Right. So sometimes we have situations where we've got clients that are, divorced or separated from their partner or the children's parent, other parent, and they have real concerns about, if something happens to me, I don't trust him or her to take care of the kids because they have a drug problem or they're in prison or, these other things. And so that's why it's also important that we designate and we identify what those concerns are and we memorialize them while you are alive and well, so that if, God forbid, anything happens while your kids are young, there are instructions and legal documents that will protect them.
So as a single parent in that, let's say in that situation, do you have the ability to determine what happens to the kids at least on your portion. And does that end up in court ever if the father contests it, or their parent, I should say?
Right. So potentially it could end up in court, right? Because the default is for the other, surviving parent, biological parent, to step in and take care of them, especially if you share custody. But that's also why it's important that you memorialize what your concerns are, what your wishes are, any specific instructions, because that will go into play as far as how your kids would be raised. And if there is a judge that's making any decisions, they would look to that as, guidance, because otherwise they're making decisions in the dark, right? They're blind. They have no idea. So really important when you have kids.
So if someone doesn't have kids, or even if they don't know, like, okay, what's the worst case scenario here if I don't have a trust in place? Explain what the probate process is and why it's expensive and why you want to avoid it.
Yeah. So in Nevada, we have an embarrassingly low threshold that where probate is triggered. So if you have assets that are valued, and this is not if you owe, debts, this is the value of the assets. If they're valued at over $25,000, which most of us have those assets, right? Sure. We've got bank accounts, we've got investments, we've got real estate. So all of these are automatic triggers to probate if you do not have a plan or a proper plan in place. And what that looks like is when you pass away and you don't have a plan, your family or someone on your behalf has to petition the court, the probate court, and a judge will be deciding who steps in as your executor and even to qualify as an executor. So there might be someone that you trust, even in your will, you can designate an executor, right? It doesn't keep you out of probate. And the judge is going to be deciding whether they can serve in that fiduciary capacity. And it's very intrusive. It's very invasive, what they have to go through. They have to, submit their credit, their financial history, because they're serving in that role. And that takes time. All of this is very expensive, as you mentioned, right, Nikki? So there's all these expenses as far as attorney's fees. So that's one of the big ones, right? Attorney's fees, typically when you are hiring a probate attorney, you're having to pay a retainer fee, right? $5,000, $10,000 up front. So that's something that's out of pocket coming out of your family members, their estate at the time to be able to cover things for your estate and hope that they'll be reimbursed at the end. So a lot of times when these estates are going through probate and there's not much as far as assets to begin with, or there could be a lot, it's creditors that are able to make claims first. So your assets are tied up when a probate gets filed. Your family doesn't have access to those assets. And the first people that get paid, as you can imagine, are first the government, so Uncle Sam, and then creditors are able to make claims. So creditors have a specific amount of time. That's another reason why it takes so long and there's a delay, because creditors have to receive notice. They have a time frame where they can submit their claims. And then once all of these expenses from creditors, the IRS, court administrative expenses, appraisal fees, attorney's fees, filing fees, all of these things come out of your estate. And then whatever's left goes to your beneficiaries or your heirs at law. So if you don't have a plan and you haven't designated any beneficiaries, it would be whoever is, next in line, basically. So your kids or your parents or sometimes it's people that you don't want to receive the assets. So yeah, probate is definitely not in our favor. It's public, it takes a long time. So the best way is to have a plan that avoids that.
And then typically on top of that, when you speak to attorney's fees, it's based on a scale amount. So whatever the value is of your estate is a percentage of that will be going to attorney's fees.
Yeah. So it can be set up that way. It depends. It can be set up where it's a percentage of the estate or where they're charging hourly fees. Either way, it's thousands and thousands of dollars typically, depending on how much is involved. But it's usually about 5 to 8% of the value of your estate is the cost.
Yeah.
So if you've got $1 million estate value, and that's not taking into consideration, if you've got a mortgage or credit card debt, it's just the value of your estate. If you've got $1 million in estate value, you're looking at $50,000-$80,000. Yeah. In all of these expenses that are associated with probate.
Ouch.
And that's the thing is I have talked to clients and colleagues who don't have children and they're like, I don't really know who to leave things to. And it's like, the incentive that I say to them is, well, if you like writing a big check to the government and if you like paying attorney's fees for no reason, then you might as well just write the check now.
Right.
Or you can just designate it to some nonprofit or someone in need who could use those resources for themselves.
Right. It's so much better to make these decisions for yourself. And I hear that a lot, like, oh, well, I don't really care who gets my assets, or I don't have kids. And so it's like, but you've worked so hard, during your lifetime. There has to be something that you care about or that you're passionate about. And if not anyone else, at least yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just what happens after you've passed away, but as we were talking about earlier, if you end up incapacitated, don't you want someone to be able to step in and take care of the wishes that, that you have as far as how you're to be cared for, or decisions, end of life decisions, and what you would want as far as those final arrangements and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would think so.
Yeah. You've worked too hard to not have a legacy.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there anything specific to Nevada in regards to like trust law, or are there benefits to, obviously we know that Nevada has no inheritance tax, no income tax. Is there anything in the law that is beneficial or different for Nevada?
Yeah. So Nevada actually is a great state for a lot of reasons, right? That's why we love it here. Yes. But so many opportunities and benefits in the law for people from, no state income, right? That's one. No state income tax, no death tax. So there's no inheritance tax here. Also, we have a very beneficial trust laws and business laws, right? So on the trust side, we have, some states have what are called domestic asset protection trusts, but Nevada is ranked at the top for these types of trusts. And the people that are good candidates for these trusts are people that have an estate that's valued at over $1 million, and that you have, concern, or you want to protect your assets during your lifetime. So this is another common, an important distinction that I'll talk to as far as a trust. So many times people think that, I've got a trust, and so that means if someone sues me, that they can't come after my assets. My assets are protected, they're sheltered. That is not true of a revocable living trust.
Okay.
And the revocable living trust is the main vehicle that we utilize on the estate planning side to have everything kind of flow through. It's the centerpiece of your plan, right? Everything kind of flows through it, addresses all of those major contingencies, keeps everything private. We can avoid taxes. We avoid probate. We avoid conflict by having a revocable living trust. But if someone sues you, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, or you're in an accident, this can happen to anyone, right? Yeah. Or you're a business owner, someone sues you, or you have any creditors, any debts that are owed. Those creditors can come after the assets that you have in your revocable living trust. So it doesn't give you that airtight asset protection. Now, if you are concerned about that and you want to protect your assets during your lifetime and also beyond, then setting up a Nevada asset protection trust has huge benefits. And we have actually a lot of clients that come from out of state because Nevada has the best protection. And they'll set up a Nevada asset protection trust, and it's a little different. It's structured differently than the revocable living trust, where you have to have a Nevada trustee. So typically serving as what's called a distribution trustee. So it gives some distance between you as kind of the owner of those assets and the distributions. You can still be a trustee of that trust where you're directing the investments and things like that, but you have to have a Nevada designated trustee. So that's one of the statutory requirements. So it could be a friend, it could be, someone else that you trust. It can't be a close family member, and it can't be someone that's subordinate to you. So it could even be a third party, like another trust company. So we have a lot of clients out of state set up their Nevada asset protection trust, and they hire, one of our collateral, professionals or law or firms that serve as that trustee. But once your assets are in that trust, and their creditors basically have a 2-year statute of limitations. If they don't make a claim, then they're barred from making a claim. So that's another reason why Nevada is favored when it comes to estate or asset protection, is because we have the shortest time period of, sometimes it's 5 years or or longer
Really?
with these other states. And so Nevada has the shortest and the most robust protection against creditors. And there are no exception creditors, by the way. So no creditor can basically come after these assets. Whereas in other states, there are certain exceptions where, if you owe alimony or if you owe the IRS or you owe whatever it is, there are these exceptions. In Nevada, every creditor is barred.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Go Nevada.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we hope to talk to you a little bit more about wills and trusts and all of the different things that are offered in the state. Hopefully we don't want to make it too heavy this time.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll come back.
Yeah,
And we
for
can
sure.
do some more topics. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about, just real quickly, living in Las Vegas. What are some of the things keeping you here besides your family?
Yeah. So of course, family's here, but I love the community. I grew up here and the community has actually changed a lot, as I'm sure you know, where it's so much more collaborative and especially among women, there's so much more support, I feel. And that's another reason why we started the group Women Decision Makers, which I hope that you'll come to the next breakfast. Yes. So we do this breakfast every other month. It's complimentary. So any woman in the community is welcome to come. Typically it's business owners, female professionals, sometimes stay-at-home moms, that they're looking to make connections or get back into the workforce. So very diverse as far as who attends those events. But we do a breakfast every other month. So the odd months, so January, March, May, July, and so on. Usually the last Wednesday of the month. And the website where you can get more information is ylgwdm.com. But that's one of my favorite things to do. Is that's one of the things that keeps me here. Not just my business, which I love, but also the community that's here, the women that are here, and just having that circle of support is so important.
I love that because I think a lot of people have this misconception, or we did have a reputation for being not the warmest place, very transient. And I think we talk about this in the podcast. Like, I don't think that's the case so much anymore.
Right.
And I think it's changing.
Right. It's
I
so
think we can be
different.
part of that.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think it's important that we do these things. And thank you to the two of you for, highlighting these, the people that are here in the community, because that's how we're able to share our resources and build community and build networks together.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And I'd love to come back.
We would love to have you. Hey, this is Nikki from the Ended Up in Vegas podcast. Thank you so much for being part of our first 500 downloads. We hope you follow, rate, and review our podcast, because that's kind of how this thing works, for more people to learn what it's really like to live in Las Vegas.